Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, today we're unpacking something literally mind-bending. We're diving into the Gilde-Model. This is a profoundly ambitious framework that sets out to unify the absolute greatest mysteries of our universe. We are talking about a complete, ground-up reimagining of reality, from the deepest quantum scales all the way to the vastness of cosmology, and even tackling the very nature of consciousness itself. Let's just jump right in. For a moment, I want you to completely let go of the traditional idea of atoms, particles, and solid stuff. Just set it aside. Instead, pose this paradigm-shifting question to yourself. What if the universe isn't made of matter at all, but is fundamentally constructed entirely out of relationships? What if things don't just have relationships, but relationships literally create things? So, here is our roadmap for today. We'll briefly look at the crisis in science, define the primitives of reality, and examine the 4 core axioms. Then, we'll build the universe from scratch, through the triadic root and the relational quantum, leading all the way up to a hypercomplexity explosion.
Section 1. The crisis in science, the broken bridge in physics.
For decades now, right, we've had this massive broken bridge in physics. It's this seemingly irreconcilable gap between general relativity, quantum field theory, and the totally unsolved hard problem of consciousness. Established science kind of separates the physical world from consciousness, treating the mind like it's just a mere byproduct of complex brain chemistry. But the Gilde-Model, it operates like an ontological rescue mission. It doesn't throw out established physics at all. Instead, it provides a new foundational web where physics and consciousness are actually just different emergent properties of the exact same underlying relational network.
Section 2. The primitives of reality. Building blocks of a relational universe.
So to build this unified web, the Gilde-Model completely wipes the slate clean. It asks, what are the absolute minimum requirements for reality? First up, we have the entity. Now, in this model, an entity is not a physical chunk of matter. It's not a rock, it's not a particle. It is simply a cluster of relations. It's any identifiable differentiation in relational space that exists purely because it relates to itself and to other things. Next up is the distinction. Think of this as the core cognitive action of the universe. A distinction is essentially a binary operation that produces those entities by marking a boundary. It's the act of drawing a line in the sand and saying, hey, this is different from that. Without that specific act, all potentiality would just remain this undifferentiated, infinite soup. Which brings us directly to the relation. This is a structured connection, and according to the Gilde-Model, this right here is the primary substance of reality. The crucial point to remember is this anchor rule. Things do not create relationships. Relationships create things. Literally everything we perceive as an object is totally secondary to the relationship that formed it in the first place. Section 3. The 4 core axioms, the laws of relational operation. All right, so now that we have our primitive building blocks, entities, distinctions, and relations, how do they actually operate? Well, we have 4 core axioms that prevent a universe from just magically popping out of absolute nothingness. First, validity. Any observation requires a logically consistent observer. Second, potentiality. There's absolutely no creation out of nothing. Everything actualizes from a pre-existing latent potential. Third, dynamic change. The very act of realizing a potential forces an unavoidable structural change. And fourth, interdependence. Everything is connected. I really want to lean into that 4th axiom for a second, interdependence. You know what the ultimate mind-bending consequence of this law is? 0. The number is exactly 0. There are exactly 0 isolated entities in the entire universe. Absolutely nothing can exist outside of a relationship. Even the universe as a whole is fundamentally defined by its relationship to its own potential. It's wild to think about. Section 4. The triadic root, the spark of existence. Okay, so if everything comes from a pre-existing potential, how does the universe actually boot up? We start with 3 key elements. First, the initial potential state, which is literally the space of all logical possibilities. Then, primordial consciousness. Now, don't think of human thought here. This is just the absolute minimal capacity to register that something exists. Finally, we have the logical sense. This is the engine connecting the two. It transforms potential into actual reality by allowing that primordial consciousness to register a possibility.
Section 5. The relational quantum The first real manifestation.
The exact moment that engine fires, we get the very first real manifestation in the universe, the relational quantum. The model calls this psi. It is the absolute smallest unit of reality, and it's a brilliant synthesis of two crucial poles. On the inside, we have the info bit, the objective pole carrying discrete, absolute information. And perfectly paired with it is elementary consciousness, the subjective pole containing primitive experience. By fusing objective information with subjective experience at the absolute ground floor of reality, the Gilde-Model essentially resolves quantum mechanics' famous observer problem. The observer and the observed are born at the exact same time from the exact same relation. Now, as these relational quantums start to interact and realize new potentials, something else is born, proto-time. But wait, this isn't the physical time of clocks or relativity. Think of this as discrete, algorithmic time. It's essentially the computational ticks of the universe, sequentially logging all these new realization actions. It emerges entirely before physical time, completely laying the structural groundwork for the time we eventually experience every day.
Section 6, the complexity explosion, the Big Bang of relationships. All right, here is the thrilling climax. We have our first quantum. We have our ticks of proto-time. Now, through a massive feedback loop of continuous connections, things are about to grow at a hyper-exponential rate. It's honestly like a cosmic social network, just desperately trying to connect every single possible dot. It starts with incubation, a few early relationships growing linearly. Then, explosion, a hyper-exponential blast where relationships form relationships with other relationships. It becomes infinitely complex almost instantly. Finally, saturation. The whole system levels off, attempting to achieve a unified absolute coherence.
So, what exactly happens when you have a literal explosion of relationships firing off at hyper-exponential speeds? You get xenotime compression. Because the sheer density of relationships is skyrocketing so insanely fast, those algorithmic ticks of proto-time get exponentially shorter and shorter relative to physical time. This explosive time-compressing growth rapidly cools and orders the entire system. It literally sets the geometric stage for physical reality, gravity, and the actual matter that we interact with today.
It's just an incredibly profound way to view the cosmos, isn't it? Not as a bunch of dead objects bumping into each other in a cold, empty void, but as a living, hyper-dense web of pure relational experience. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. If your existence, at its deepest ontological level, is purely the sum of your relations, who and what are you relating to right now? Take a second to really think about that. Keep questioning and keep exploring.